Welcome everybody to another episode of The Solar Journey. Today I have the pleasure to welcome solar enthusiast, prominent figure in the PV industry and former CEO of Meyer Burger, Gunter Erfurt. Welcome, Gunter.
Hey, Torsten. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so 12 days ago, Meyer Burger released an ad hoc announcement that you're no longer the CEO of Meyer Burger. How has your life changed since then? What are the positive aspects of your post-CEO of Meyer Burger life?
Well, what's really positive nowadays is that I find time to sleep and to relax a bit and to recharge batteries after this crazy ride of the last years. That's a real relief. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah. When you look back at your time at Meyer Burger as CTO, but also CEO, what are you most proud of when you look back?
Well, Meyer Burger is a great company, more than 70 years old, that has shaped the industry quite a lot in the past decades. I think what makes me really proud is that the company has made this bold move and this transition into a solar cell and module manufacturer in a difficult environment. And there's a strong team behind, and I'm really proud of the teamwork that the company did and the achievements of growing 3 gigawatt factories in such a short time.
Yeah. On the other side, are there regrets that you have now when you look back?
Well, I would say there are many, in particular that there has been no support in Europe from the political side, despite bold announcements and bullish announcements in the past 2 years, in particular after the breakout of the Russian-Ukraine war, or the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, and all the attempts from the political side to help the sector regrowing. Obviously, this has not come to any fruition. This is something I shouldn't say that I'm regretting, but it makes me really sad, because it's a lost opportunity, not only for the industry but also for the sovereignty and for the economic growth of Europe.
Yeah. So the US had similar thoughts, and they put in action the IRA. I just learned at the PVSec it's not called IRA, but IRA. Actually, Markus Beck from the Department of Energy taught us, all of us in Vienna, how to pronounce it correctly. So US had similar thoughts, and they put in action the IRA. And so there's success in the US, but there's also question marks. For example, the IRA has not managed to bring back a considerable amount of cell manufacturing at the scale many expected. What do you think is the key reason for that?
I would say we have to look at this topic, I think, in a couple of years. If it really is that no cell factories are growing, I don't think so, to be honest. Building a solar cell factory simply takes a bit longer than building a module factory. The module goes much quicker. You don't need clean room equipments and things like this. So it's a faster construction process. So that's why I'm saying time will show. There are many announcements for solar cell manufacturings. In fact, I think where's a bit of an imbalance in the IRA is that the module gets more support financially, with 7 cents per watt peak for every module produced and sold in the US, whereas the cell only receives 4 cents per watt peak. So there's a difference in it. Nevertheless, there is a change also in what's called the ITC tax credits, investment tax credits in the US. That means that customers of domestically produced product receive another incentive, also a tax credit, when they buy and install domestically produced panels. So there is an incentive. I think the US government is also adjusting the measures according to the needs, probably also sometimes out of the view of the industry a bit too slow, but nevertheless, I think there's still a great momentum also when it comes to building solar cell factories. Nevertheless, I think one element of a bit of a downside is that in the US, there are so many construction activities ongoing, not only in the clean tech sector, but also in other areas, public spending also that's endorsed by the IRA, that generates a bit of an inflated environment in terms of costs associated with infrastructure and construction. And that is potentially also something that is holding back some projects, because it's, for the time being at least, more expensive than originally budgeted.
Okay. Yeah, we'll come back to building fabs in the US, in Europe, etc. But before we do that, I would like to go back in time a little. Go back in time in your time, in your life. So you hold a PhD in physics. You started to work in the solar industry in 2003, and that was with Solar World. Back then, when one of the big global players in what I would call the first industrial phase of solar. So you are 1 year ahead of me. I started my industrial career in 2004 at Q-Cells, also here in that area in the southeast of Germany. Actually, we're both now in Saxony, talking as we talk. So Q-Cells was back then also one of the big global players, and within Solar World, you climbed up the ranks with roles in R&D, investment planning, tech transfer, and then you moved on to Meyer Burger, I believe one of the possible suppliers of Solar World back then. That's in 2015 now. And at Meyer Burger, you held positions as COO, CTO, and finally CEO. And until today, you're a member of the board at Oxford PV, the UK-German perovskite company that just shipped the very first perovskite silicon tandem modules. And I think it was to the US, actually, to some utility. Yeah, and you won the Becquerel Prize in 2023, maybe the most prestigious PV award in Europe. So quite a career. Congrats on that. And this all roots in one decision that you took a few years back, which is to study physics. When did you know you want to study physics, and why did you do that?
Well, I'm a child born to parents, or a person born to parents that were both engineers, and I think studying something technical or science related was something that I grew up with in some way. Nevertheless, after school, I took the decision to do an apprenticeship in Germany. So became an electrician and worked for an equipment maker before I went back to high school and then to college. So doing something in physics, I think, was more a decision related to the fact that at the time I wanted to do something that had a positive environmental impact, but it was in the mid-90s, and there were not so many opportunities. So I thought that studying physics or something that's related to physics keeps a window of opportunity open, because physicists they tend to acquire a broad knowledge. Maybe some do very specific things also, but in general, you become a generalist and can do many things once you're graduated. And this was probably the reason why I studied it, and I think it played out well, because then in the beginning 2000 years, environment changed and an industry grew in clean tech, and I was so happy when I received my first contract with Deutsche Solar at the time, a Solar World company that made wafers. And by the way, we may have met at Q-Cells, because I remember Q-Cells has been one of my wafer customers that I had to take care of as a technical marketing guy.
All right.
And I remember the good old days when QCELS was shipping solar cells to SolarWorld, and SolarWorld was shipping wafers to to QCELS, and both parties would complain about quality issues. So it's been a fun time.
Yeah, actually, so my first project at QCells was actually to introduce thinner wafers, or thin wafers, it's called. We switched from 300 microns to 240 microns.
Oh, what a big
What a
step!
big step, yeah.
Considering where we are today.
Yeah, nobody wanted to do that of the other technology guys, and I was a new guy on board, and they dropped that project on my desk, and I was very happy about it actually, because that made me interact with the whole company, right, from purchase and towards product management and sales, right, of course, including production, where the key task was to avoid breakage. So yeah, so we might have met already 20 years ago. Interesting.
With less gray hair, both of us.
Way less, yeah. Covering mine today. Bad headache. Yeah, you already mentioned your interest for the environmental aspects, and it was already the motivation to study physics. So how did that come about? Was there a special moment, a spark moment, or did that interest for the environment grew over time?
Well, I think it's been more kind of a process. So I grew up in East Germany, region, as we know and remember, with many issues in the environment due to coal mining and coal-fired power plants and other, I would say, environmental disasters. And it was so obvious that something needs to be done. So when the war came down, people enjoyed their new freedom, buying new cars, traveling, and I think inside me it generated more of a decision. You know, we need to do something. And then I when I started studying, I read books by Paul Crutzen, the Nobel Prize winner, who investigated the ozone depletion in the atmosphere, and so that really made me very sad, I have to say. And so that's why I it was, you know, transitioning into this environmental thing. And as I said, in the beginning there were not so many opportunities, but then all of a sudden in the late 90s or beginning 2000 years, as we both know, when solar took off, it's been a great moment for young people who then finally could live their passion also in their professional careers.
Very much. I always call that a DNA changing phase in my life when I joined QCells, because finally, after let's say 10 years of working as a scientist, working on projects, suddenly the industry took off, and it was just this great phase where everything was possible, right, and you could be part of it. What was it like for you to be part of that industry back then? Maybe you can switch back to that time. You already mentioned that you were so happy to get that first contract in your preferred industry. Maybe you can elaborate a bit on that phase at Deutsche Solar, SolarWorld.
Yeah. So I think what I'm most thankful about, and I can only hope that every young person that has finished its studies and is going into a first job can enjoy the same opportunity, was that an industry with such a momentum, requiring so much creativity, also, you know, a startup mode like thing that has been the best first, if I may say so, socialization into a professional career. You know, some young people may join companies which are a bit more, you know, old-fashioned or super conservative, or, you know, maybe slowly moving and things like this. It was exactly the opposite, and there were no real boundaries. Whenever you were creative, and you know that probably from QCells, when I've been there, I was sensing the same spirit. And that has been great, because I'm convinced that the first years in a young professional career, they are pretty much deciding about the entire career, what you get used to, what are the first people you are interacting with, and being with such creative and bold and smart people in solar has been a lot of fun. And what I'm also finding super interesting is that even nowadays, the people that I initially worked with from external parties, equipment suppliers, they're still around. I mean,
Yeah.
look at all these great companies that also have made it through in the past decades in Europe and globally, and they are still there, sometimes even with the same people. So I think this has been a lot of fun and a perfect start into a professional career.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. What's the biggest learning from that phase, which still forms your decisions today?
Well, I would say never give up. There are so many reasons for people to drop an idea or give up on a project or get distracted or whatsoever. And I think this time has taught me that it's always worth fighting, and not for useless things clearly, but if even if there's a slim chance, give it a try and find a setup that has an increasing chance to win, and also motivate others, because there are different types of people, and some need a good vision to follow through. And I believe that's something I could learn in my initial, I would say, 5 years in the industry, and this I still find this to be a real gift, because it was also given to me or provided to me by my previous supervisors and bosses that I had, and also this a big thank you goes to those people who basically supported this working style, and also for the benefit of the company at the time. And I think this is I have actually only good memories when I think back. This has been a super interesting and time with a great spirit behind the people.
Yeah. You just mentioned the term to fight for your ideas, and I think it's correct to say that you have been also in the recent years that you have been fighting for very publicly also for bringing back solar cell manufacturing to Europe and Germany. And for that, you even appeared twice on German national television at the late night show of Markus Lanz, and you must have met top politicians behind the scenes and also officially of the current German government, and I believe also on the European level. So you moved from being a solar scientist up to the top level. What did that feel like? Did you ever see you in that position when you started in solar 21 years ago?
Well, probably not. This was not foreseeable, but as I said, physicists are generalists per se, and going on late night shows and discussing the political arena is something you can also do. So joking aside, I think it was absolutely necessary to raise the voice here and try to fight for a solution for the entire industry. It's sometimes been interpreted as lobby work for Meyer Burger only, which I think is totally untrue. All the concepts that have been discussed at the late night show, or also with politicians, were concepts that were actually initially created by the European Union or by the European Commission that has requested the CR group, European Solar Industry Alliance, to work it out and find ways that could be applied in 27 member states. And Germany was probably most prominent, as it is the biggest economy with the most vibrant solar industry. And I'm still thinking that the big fight that the industry entirely did, and probably myself too, has definitely been worth it, because it was a chance, a huge chance, even beyond a 50% likelihood, until March of this year, when politicians were totally undecided what to do and what not to do. That Germany missed this opportunity is, in my opinion, and now speaking for the entire clean tech industry, not only solar, it has been a huge strategic mistake. And I'm also fully convinced that the day is going to come when this is being finally regretted.
Yeah. We'll come back to that in a moment when we talk about the, let's say, political process and the implications of where we are today. But let me just briefly switch back to your personal situation. So you made that move from the, let's say, Fermi level to the late night show level. So how did you master that transition from being an expert to a global manager, right? So you have operations in the US, in Germany, your appearance on TV shows, on radio. How did you grow your leadership skills, management skills? Was that a conscious process, or did you just fall into the next role, and did you mostly learn on the job? How did you balance the demand and your skill set?
Well, I would say it's been a process of more than 2 decades finally to grow into such a role, and it's not happening overnight. I had the great opportunity, as I elaborated a bit on, to do great learnings on the job, but also in other trainings, of course, throughout my career, and I'm also again very grateful to those people who enabled it and allowed it to happen. But I think it comes with continuous learning, and even if you go to the media and become maybe a spokesperson for the industry, that also goes with learning. So you need to learn a few basic rules about media communication, and if you are open to something like this and open and to learning and having fun in continuous learning, then that's where you can get. But if you would ask me what I enjoy more, sitting on late night shows or being a physicist, I would probably say the latter is true. Because what you do in physics, you can usually more trust in than what you may do in late night shows, at least from the effect it's generating, as we've learned.
Yeah, you just mentioned the learnings, your media training, maybe on the job, but also maybe on a formal level. What's the most important thing you would like to pass on to the audience?
Well, what I'm personally finding super effectful when you are a manager or a leader in a company or an organization is what's most effective in terms of people following you is if you can convince them by your expertise, if you can prove that if ever something happens, you yourself as a manager could go back to work, right? You could do the real thing, and you're not just sitting there and push, as I say, the delegate button and tell people do this, do that. But if your team understands that you yourself as a manager understands that, and not only from a pure communications point of view, but also technically or methods you are discussing, that you understand it and that you have done it yourself before, and so you understand the problems and the challenges of your team and can help them to resolve them. I find this to be most effective. So just looking into maybe receiving an MBA and then believing you are a great manager, I think that's the wrong attitude. You should always be open to learning and to understanding what your team's challenges are, and ideally you have gone through the same issues and can teach and guide from your own experience.
Okay, excellent, thanks. Let's move from your personal experience to Meyer Burger, the transformation of Meyer Burger. So Meyer Burger was originally a equipment manufacturer, and then there was the decision taken to become a solar module manufacturer. Can you outline the thinking that stood behind that?
Well, I think when we look at how the entire industry evolved, and also in particular with the focus of of the industry currently, the manufacturing part happening in China. It's true that Meyer Burger and other European companies have been pretty strong in equipment business throughout the years and for decades, if I may say so, setting many standards in the industry. But finally, China came forward publicly latest in 2015 with its Made in China 2025 initiative, which is now 1 year to completion, aiming at owning the industry entirely, to make it very short and crisp, including equipment business. So, i.e., the Chinese market was already 4 or 5 years ago foreseeably closed for Western companies, all of them. I think when Meyer Burger made the move to do this change and still being an equipment maker, but using the products in its own manufacturing, other companies did laugh at the company. But if we look into what's happening nowadays, I think almost all European or Western equipment makers have given up on the Chinese market because China is wanting to have the full control over the sector itself, including equipment. So I think this has been a rationale at the time, understanding that this standard old model of European equipment into China and they produce is no longer working, and current reality has been proving this right. And I think this was the major rationale behind this bold move.
Yeah. And with that change of the business model, you became its CEO. So why did you want to take on that new role? You were the CTO before.
Yeah. Well, as I said, it's been a huge opportunity, and also important to do this shift. And I like and love challenges. I always did and always will. And I think it's been a huge challenge transforming from equipment to producing cell and modules. But it's I did it also because I knew there's a strong team behind. We talked about teamwork and what's required to be successful, and it's only working if you have a strong team behind or standing behind the project. And these prerequisites were all there. And so I decided, let's go for it. And I have never regretted it, not at all, not a single second.
Yeah, let's go for it. Meyer Burger stands very much for heterojunction solar cell technology. It's the major focus of the company. Maybe IBC or tandem coming up in the future. So, in your personal view, what do you think is attractive about the heterojunction technology over others?
Well, I would say what's most attractive is the simplicity. Once you know how it works, I have to say. So there's a lot of secret sauce in it, as all the heterojunction makers do know. But when I look into the process sequence of heterojunction versus TOPCon, I see a clear benefit by having 4 process clusters as opposed to more than 10, and probably also more to be added to squeeze out the last opportunities of increased efficiencies from TOPCon. So it may require additional process steps. I also think from an environmental impact point of view, if you look into TOPCon versus heterojunction, TOPCon generates, for instance, the process sequence generates nitrous gases, which is nasty, which is not the case for heterojunction. TOPCon requires multiple wet processes in manufacturing that generate wastewater that needs to be treated. Heterojunction requires only one wet process with easily to be treated chemicals, and it's a low temperature process. You need less electrical energy. So I think from a real 360-degree point of view, looking into the efficiency potential, the environmental impact of manufacturing, the simplicity, it's got many benefits over TOPCon. And what's also a big concern when I compare the two technologies, I think it's also a pretty exciting story how quickly TOPCon evolved. It's for the first time in the industry, the solar industry's history, a technology has made it within less than 10 years from its first mentioning in the academic literature into mass manufacturing. We've never seen that before. All other technologies took decades until they were fully deployed into manufacturing. But it also comes with many caveats, which we have recently learned. And even though I have not attended EU PVSec, but I read in the news that this has been one of the major topics, which is the UV degradation of TOPCon. And I recall some product testings also recently where I've seen alarming degradations of TOPCon by various manufacturers. And this is something which is a great concern, which heterojunction, at least the companies that know how to make it, have already resolved. Another huge benefit, in my view, is when we think ahead, what's going to come next with solar cells currently achieving, let's say, 25% plus minus in cell efficiency in manufacturing, 0.5%, as we know, absolute percent increase per annum, more or less. So we will sooner or later reach the ceiling of what's possible with single junctions. And so then we have to move into the next thing, which is obviously tandems. And heterojunction forms a great base cell for instance, a perovskite on silicon solar cell. So I do also think that for the future evolution of the industry, and maybe also with little revolutions, perovskite being one of them, I think heterojunction is a great technology. That's my conviction.
Yeah, and yet, despite the advantages you mentioned, complexity, environmental impact, and readiness for tandems, right now in terms of volume, TOPCon has outcompeted heterojunction at this point. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, various reasons. I think when you look into the production equipment needed for TOPCon, it's more or less, with a few exceptions, the same fleet that is known already from aluminum BSF and PERC. So it's a pretty robust technology. That's what I would say, at least from a manufacturing point of view. So that's one reason. And the other one is clearly that, I mean, the second biggest cost driver in solar cell manufacturing after silicon, the wafer cost, is silver. And let's call them the standard approaches of heterojunction, they have not yet mastered to get silver laydown and silver consumption to levels where TOPCon, for instance, is. Okay. And if you have this under control, and I at least know one company that got it under control, then you have a chance. So, but the silver topic is clearly a challenge. That's true.
Okay. We'll come back to technology at the end. I would like to jump now to the political aspect, and you already mentioned the EU PVSec. We always switch very quickly from technology to politics, and we want to do that here as well, right? Because it's on center stage these days. So when we look back, when we started, you and I, Germany provided the market for the first, let's say, industrial phase of solar with its feed-in tariff called EEG. And fortunately, and along with that, its public solar R&D institutions and equipment manufacturers provided excellent ground for production of solar cells, not only the application, but also the manufacturing of solar cells. And I guess you can say that China took it to the next level by first using mostly German technology. There were some US and I think maybe French manufacturers as well of equipment. So with the help of German technology, transferred by equipment manufacturers, China took it to the next level, and they managed to scale. They introduced very cost-efficient operations. There were subsidies by central government, but also the provinces, I think, which are now the main money lenders or resource lenders as of today. But also what they manage is to establish a environment with fierce competition among equipment manufacturers that drove down costs, but also drove up the technology. And there's also fierce competition between cell and module manufacturers. And all that being said, the benefit for the world is crazy cheap modules, right? So one could argue, and many do so, why not relax? Why not move on? Just install these cheap modules. Why is bringing back manufacturing to Europe, also to US and India? Why is it such an important task in your view?
Yeah. So I think I do have multiple answers to this. It is an argument to simply relax and rely on a single source supply chain, which China currently and obviously is. Nevertheless, I think one argument in terms of local economies is, and I found this an interesting statement by the former Volkswagen CEO Herbert Diess, who said about a year ago that in his expectation the solar industry globally will have more jobs than the current global automotive industry. And it would be an example of an industry that I think is would be outstanding in terms of there's no other industry like this where only one country is the supplier. And honestly, also companies in Southeast Asia that are not China are usually Chinese companies, just as a satellite factory in these countries. And so there's a reason for the economy. It would make a lot of sense to also grow such factories in Europe as they are generating jobs. They create a pretty solid environment also for equipment makers, for material makers, for other industries. So it generates a momentum. Secondly, a solar module is not just a simple product. It is an energy infrastructure product. And there's no other example in the world where countries have been so naive when it comes to energy business. Why relaxing and relying on a single source? Europe did it with natural gas, as we know, with pretty much not a single source, but a big source with gas supplied by Russia, and we know what's going on right now. So I think the mix of sovereignty, prosperous industry growing, in particular in times when other industry may go away or fade out as old technology products are no longer needed. I think Europe in particular would be a great spot to have such an industry. The US is currently doing it for the same reasons, a reshoring program for clean tech and other industries. India is doing it. Other countries are also attempting this industry. So, I think that's a complex mix. And as you said also already, there has been a lot of technology development in Europe. Europe being still a leader in technology development for today's and future solar cell and solar module technologies. Without an industry that's also manufacturing, I am afraid that also the great R&D base in Europe might fade away or disappear in the mid and long term because nobody needs these results anymore. And so, these are the reasons, in my view: science on the one hand, economic growth, but also energy sovereignty that provide the arguments for a domestic industry.
Yeah, thanks. Have you found a study which looks at the impact on the national economy, right? Not just for the, let's say, privately held economy, but on the national economy if one or the other project would be developed, and how does it compare with the efforts with the benefits? Do you know such a study? And
yeah, there is in fact there has been a study in conjunction with what was called the resilience bonus that Germany was considering to pay to customers for buying domestically produced products, which fell through, as we know, in March of this year. And the German Solar Association, BSW, has come forward with an analysis of a tax impact this would have, because if people work in that industry, they pay taxes, they make a salary from which they pay taxes, they buy goods. The industry is growing also, auxiliary industries that are needed to produce panels. And there has obviously been a huge positive impact, even over subsidies or subsidies provided to help the industry growing. Mid and long term, it would have been a positive case in terms of tax returns for the government. Which a good state subsidy has to be like, and that I also think the IRA in the US is working like this. In the mid and long term, it's going to be positive for the government there.
Yeah. We'll jump to that, and it'd be interesting to understand, because you were talking to the decision makers why it didn't come through. Before, I would like to jump to the aspect. So China must have seen that and has seen the future role. Why is it that China has developed such a dominant role? What were the major measures how they took over the industry as they do right now?
Well, with my honestly meant and full respect to China, I think they have developed a great ambition to exactly reach this goal, and they are keeping up also during decades of pushing this through if needed, which is different in Europe and maybe also in other countries where we are thinking a bit more short term. And I think that's the big difference. And the other difference might be that when you just look into the debate of how do we cope with the challenges of energy supply in Europe and the future demand for electrical energy, and still we're having the discussions about what's called as a political term technology openness, if I have translated this correctly, in Europe. I mean, we are physicists and engineers, and we know how a technology readiness level process in development works. And I think it's fair to say that engineers and scientists already do know today what's going to happen in the next 10 years. We know this because the technology readiness process takes a while until something goes into mass manufacturing. And I think there's a bit of a naive belief among non-technical politicians that, out of the blue, tomorrow somebody generates something that we have never seen before. And that's how they translate or refer to the term of technology openness. And I believe, from what I'm noticing, is that China has a roadmap in terms of how this transition is going to function with renewables, and that's what they are holding on to, and provide the support that the industry needs to grow big time. Because it would also be naive to think that an industry that is requested to grow so massively within a short period of time can manage this out of its own. It doesn't work. So it's not the precise definition of an inorganic growth, but it's not an organic growth where a company generates revenues and then it grows slowly. But here we need to see a growth big time, and I think that's what China understood back in the second half of the first decade, and that started from 2000, and now we see where they are. It's unbelievable, and I think if other regions want to grow the same, at least to become resilient, they should carefully look into what China did well and what they maybe also did not so well. There are probably also aspects where they have learned their lessons, but it would actually be a good chance for any second mover to just take the learnings, drop what has failed, and go from there and make it better.
So at the core, you see a long-term vision, a long-term roadmap that China had roughly 20 years ago, and they just executed on that and did not trust on some crazy miracle that you described as the technology openness that is quite often used here in Germany to, I would say, most times delay the awkward decisions for some industries. You just mentioned the things that did not go so well in China. Is there anything that comes to your mind out of the blue? Maybe?
Yeah, I would say so. I think what's not good in my view is when you look at the balance sheets of most of these companies, they are not making money nowadays and or themselves in some sort of a crisis, but they also did not make a lot of money when the business went better. So I think in an ideal world, after years of initial subsidies that are required, as I said, to help an industry growing big time in the shortest period possible, the world should find ways to go back to a non-subsidized solar industry or clean tech industry that basically gives fair chances and the opportunities also to other companies. And that's probably also within China a problem, because some companies benefit more than the others, depending on in what province you are working. And it has now generated an industry that is way too big for what actually the global market can absorb, creating many damages also domestically in China. So I would say it's gotten here and there a little bit out of control, I would say, but the overarching strategic target is still in sight. So it would need to be re-leveled here and there or rebalanced in order to get back to more profitability and prosperous growth. Because as we know, solar requires a lot of investments, so i.e. capex money, but also a lot of R&D to tackle the next challenges. And I also do think what I find critical when I look at China. Why is China gifting modules to the world at 8 cents? Well, why are they doing this? Generating all the problems they are having right now. I'm convinced if a module would be twice that price, let's say 16, the market growth would be the same, because it's still unbelievably cheap comparing, where you and I came from 20 years ago, when the module was I don't even recall, €3.50 per watt peak or something like this. So there is actually no need why they are doing this, because they have the monopoly anyways. So they could manage. But they don't, and I think this is something that's hard to understand from an economic point of view. Why so much money is invested, so much value is generated, and then it's being gifted for free to the world. Yeah. So that doesn't really make sense.
Well, I would assume that they are simply all private, most of them privately held company, and there's competition, right? And they have the warehouse is full of modules, and they need cash, and that's why they just push it onto the market, right? I could imagine that there's no national strategic thinking behind it, right? It's just trying to survive. That's what I would assume, right? Yeah.
I'm not so sure, because if you are selling for more than a year at such low prices, you definitely need support from a big daddy, from a sugar daddy, and that usually is the government, because otherwise these companies don't have the cash reserves to survive such a long time at at prices way below their manufacturing costs. So this doesn't work in the long run.
I mean, apparently there was a panel discussion at the SNEC show in Shanghai. Shanghai earlier this year, and apparently there were 10 CEOs of 10 large solar manufacturers on stage, and one said, well, next year, if business continues like that, there'll be only a few left, right? So I think they do see the urge for a change, right? But until today, everybody just tries to survive right now, and there have been massive layoffs, and everybody's expecting a lot of consolidation in the market, right? And after all, solar is still a pretty an industry with lots of players, right? Which is a sign for its immaturity, right? So there's plenty of things to come. We can watch and observe and draw our conclusions. You were involved in lots of the political discussions. Can you describe what the political process was like in the last 2 and 3 years? And maybe you can compare that also with the discussions that were ongoing in the US, and you had exchange, I believe, with politicians, local and on national one. What would you describe as similarities, and where do they differ?
Yeah. So I think what has been totally interesting is that Europe actually was a first mover on potential clean tech industry support when Russia invaded Ukraine, and all the bullish and at the time I would even argue honestly meant statements made by European politicians. My most favorite quote is by Kadri Simpson, the at that time energy commissioner for the European Union, when she said it was end of March 2022, pretty much a month after Russia invaded Ukraine, we will bring solar manufacturing back to Europe, whatever it takes. So this, whatever it takes. So this was pretty drastic, and I think this was kind of a start signal for the associations, for the industry to look further into this topic and discussing how it could be managed. And the European Union has come forward with many concepts which were, considering state aid where needed for the industry, and again, not only for solar but also for wind, for batteries, for EVs, for whatsoever. The most prominent ones are probably the European Green Deal and Repower EU, and finally the Net Zero Industry Act. The problem, though, and this is probably a good point, doing a bit of a comparison between Europe and the US, is given the fact that Europe is constituted of 27 member states, the process in Europe is a bit more time-consuming and takes a bit longer than in a country like the US that's got a federal government, also states which do their own thing, but I think they were simply quicker in executing. And what I also found pretty remarkable, comparing both continents, or both Europe, the Union, and the US, is there is a better understanding of the necessities among politicians in the US than it is in Europe, also from an industry specific point of view. So a more understanding of what's needed, and that has resulted also in the respective law documents. If you look up the IRA document, I think it's on page 152 or 154, if I remember correctly. There are the terms of what you are receiving as a manufacturer for solar manufacturing. It's written in this law, unthinkable in Europe, where you have an overarching European law that it needs to be nationalized by the member states. Then you have specific execution rules that take another year until they are there. So what I'm saying by this is this entire process diverted a bit when politicians in the first place in Europe understood there's a necessity to do something, and I give them credit for it that they understood it. But executing takes usually way too long comparing the industry dynamics. And we know how our solar coaster is functioning, and that actually we need solutions within, ideally 12 months to get started. And plus solutions which last as long as needed for deciding to go into an investment cycle. And I think Europe has considerably failed on doing this, and now we are there with pretty much nothing, at least for the solar industry.
Again at EUP, so thanks a lot for that. So at EUPVSec just last week, there was kind of hope that it's not the end at EU, but it's still coming because we now have the Net Zero Industry Act, which is now on the level of the EU, and now the member states now have to turn that, as you mentioned previously, has to be turned into national law. And it seems that France and Austria and one more country, which I can't remember, have committed to put that into national law very quickly. What's your hope? Do you think that the Net Zero Industry Act has the power to turn the tide and bring bring back manufacturing to the EU?
I mean, as much as I have described myself in this podcast until so far to be an optimist,
Okay.
I don't think so. I don't think that the NCIA as a single instrument can resolve the problem. And why don't I believe this? What would be the economic rationale to endorse or support subsidize an industry in the current environment in Europe to produce, fairly priced panels in the EU that generate a decent gross profit margin, that pay for R&D, capex, and also investor margins, as long as there's no restriction on what's being imported. And why would anyone invest in an environment where a module can be purchased at 8 or 9 cents per watt peak, as it currently is the case? I think without generating a level playing field and making sure there's a fair competition happening, nothing against competition, also not from China, but it needs to be fair. And unless we have fair competition in Europe, it's not going to work. And the NCIA as a standalone tool is not helping fair competition to be reinstalled. So that's why I'm saying the countries that successfully have made it to give a foundation to their own domestic industry, i.e. US and India, have done a two-way approach, one being endorsement for or support for capex, opex, but also making sure there is a level playing field in terms of whatever is required from a trade policy point of view. I'm not saying need to be tariffs, but something that basically sets the boundaries and restricts what other importers are doing.
Yeah.
Without it, I'm less hopeful that it works for Europe.
All right. So you basically say it requires supportive schemes, but also protective schemes to grow regional manufacturing. At EUPVSec, it was quite often mentioned that it has to be comply with World Trade Organization rules. What do you think of the IRA and then the, let's say, Indian Chinese regulation? Do you think they comply? Do you have it's a big question, right? But do you know, maybe there's legal studies on on the analysis of that?
Well, I'm not a trade policy expert, obviously, but I think Europe, at least officially adhering to WTO is also something that's a bit strange. Even though, as I earlier mentioned, when you asked what I might think about what are shortcomings or caveats of the Chinese strategy, and I said, ideally in the mid and long term, the solar industry and clean tech industry is able to work without any subsidies. That would be the final target, clearly, globally, because that would obviously generate fair competition everywhere. Nevertheless, for the time being, when you look into what's real and hundreds of billions of subsidies paid into the Chinese industry, and also now the US is doing it, India is doing it, why would a continent like Europe let others grab the technology and the industry to flourish elsewhere, and adhering to WTO, which obviously has not any forceful impact on this entire development anywhere. And I also do think, from a procedural point of view, the WTO court is currently not even active. So why does Europe adhere to it when nobody else does, and even WTO is not really in operation? I think it is an idealistic approach, which, as I said, mid-long term, that should be the case. But for the time being, you need to respond to reality, and that's clearly not adhering to WTO.
Yeah. WTO is not in operation. I need to look that up. That's interesting. So that's the global picture. And when we bring down the discussion on what happened in Germany, one has to state that the let's say current solar community was and still is divided, right? So there are some large EPCs, so companies who build large solar parks, were never really in favor in political measures to support EU-made solar modules. And there's also the so-called New Solar Interest Group, mainly 1,5, NPAL, I think EKD, which fought against your ambitions, I would say. What comes to your mind when you think of that time? And do you think, and what was the impact on the resilience bonus discussions back then?
Yeah. So maybe again, it's not been my initiative, but an initiative of the entire solar industry, and also supported by the Commission. I think it's been in particular two companies fighting against it, and as we know, also the downstream sector now has huge problems in Germany and in Europe. So I would say, looking back, a bit of differentiation there and market segmentation would have worked better also for this part of the industry. My strong belief. I think it comes with a lot of opportunism in Europe also, because, as I said, it's nice to buy modules at 8 cents, at least short term and for the time being. Nobody knows if that continues forever and ever. But the unfortunate development at the time was that when you look at how the largest European solar association, industry association, which is the German Bundesverband Solarwirtschaft, BSW, has supported it with the majority votes of its members, versus two companies that did about less than 500 megawatt in the German market out of 14 gigawatt in the last year. So that so much to say about large EPCs, and not even EPCs, but residential installers. So it's been an absolute minority of companies in the market that voted so aggressively against it. But obviously they have successfully raised their concerns and voices. What's also very disappointing for me is that the companies mentioned, and not EKD, by the way, but the others have verbally communicated to the industry, to us, to others, that they are supporting it, that they support the resilience bonus, and then within weeks they changed their mind towards the other side and pushed against it very aggressively. So, an industry that's divided and that is fighting for, let's better do trade instead of manufacturing in an industry country like Germany. That's something very awkward, in my opinion. And as I said, I think we have missed a huge chance. And am I hopeful that something is remaining? Of course I am, and I think I would be one of the biggest supporters of regrowth and reshoring of a domestic industry. But the prerequisites nowadays and conditions are not really good for this.
Yeah. We need to come to an end. I understand you need to travel. We raised one topic in the beginning, setting up operations in the US. I just want to close that loop. Again, at EU PVSec, there was Markus Beck from the Department of Energy. He mentioned one aspect, which was, I think, interesting, and that he wants to solve in the next 12 months, is why is private financing, so difficult in the US? And then, of course, we have the aspect of IP. So apparently First Solar holds IP for TOPCon solar cell manufacturer. And then we have the shortage of land and factory, apparently. So out of that mix, how would you comment on that?
I think this financing aspect is something that is not only an issue in the US, but also elsewhere, as our sector, solar sector, is so much under trouble or in trouble right now. And companies which appear to have challenges, they have in every industry a harder time finding financing. So the entire appetite in investing in clean tech currently is not the best, I would say. That applies to also other clean tech sectors in other regions. So it's not an effect only happening in the US. But I think it's a cycle. It's going to come back. Then, as we've discussed, also one of the caveats of the IRA is that there's so much investment going on that some capex is inflated, too expensive. That's probably also a cycle that's going to change. There are options in the US. Under the Department of Energy, where Markus actually is part of, to provide funding, which are government credit guaranteed loans. As we know, that also takes longer when dealing with the government. It's a way longer due diligence process. So there are a few things that pretty much work against what's actually required in terms of speed. Things take longer. The sentiment is not the best for the entire industry and other clean tech industries. But as I said, it's a cycle. Let's see how that develops. On the IP side, I cannot really comment on what's the content of First Solar's fighting. What I can say, though, in terms of IP, is something that has always astonished me a lot. How I would say how naive our industry is dealing with third parties' IP. There are a few examples that still struck me when I read them first. How much IP is being obviously violated without any impact so far. So I'm still expecting these debates to grow and to create some challenges. By the way, that's another great argument for heterojunction, comparing TOPCon. There's also IP that was acquired by some Chinese companies from LG that can also be dangerous for some TOPCon makers. So we will see. But at the end of the day, litigation takes a long time. It's creating disturbance in the market. So in an ideal scenario, and maybe that's a good closing remark also from my side, we simply go back to managing this industry less aggressively, more fairly, without stealing other people's IP, without too much state subsidies also in China, doing fair game to also allow a real competition to grow. Currently, it's not a real competition. It's a state-aided competition and monopoly that has been created, in particular in China. And I think it would be great for the world to leverage all the great scientists' work wherever it comes from, and then putting it into manufacturing, growing jobs, growing industries, energy sovereignty, and contributing to wealth of the people.
Indeed, fantastic final lines. Gunter, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for taking the time and sharing your journey and outlining what could be ahead of us. What's the potential of solar? I expect we will see you in a new solar role anytime soon. At least I hope so. Thanks a lot for the time.
Thank you, Torsten, for the opportunity. Thank you.